What's going on, everybody? Welcome to AWS On Air Sports. My name is Nick. I am a sports enthusiast, but still kind of a tech novice, coming at you live from Nashville, Tennessee. Today, we're going to be talking with the NFL about how they make these next-gen stats that we see every Sunday. We've got a great show planned. For those of you new to the program, we air every 2 weeks with a different professional sports league around the world. Bundesliga, NHL, NASCAR, today NFL, talking about how cloud computing is changing their sport. So for the NFL, that's a very visible use case for us. It's the next-gen stats. We're going to be talking about pressure probabilities today and some other exciting new things they've been working on. So stay tuned for that. We'll be airing for about 1 hour. If you have any questions during the course of the show, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll try to get them answered. We have live people in the chat to answer your questions. And then we'll also try to get them answered by our guests live on the show as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in our first guest from the NFL. What's going on, Mike? How are you?
Nick, how you doing? Great to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So first and foremost, can you give everybody an introduction into what you do for the NFL?
Certainly. So I'm here at the LA office, the NFL LA office, about 100 yards away from SoFi Stadium, part of the Next Gen Stats group at the NFL. And we are the player tracking technology of the NFL. We've got chips in their shoulder pads, and we're tracking their XY location every 10th of a second. And what I do is my team of analysts and engineers, we take that data and we try to make new stats out of it, whether it's how much separation they create or the probability of a completion. Really, we are data storytellers, and we're working with the new data that's available with player tracking data.
Awesome, man. I see some trophies behind you there. I know we were kind of trash talking beforehand. I think your position as the stats expert in the NFL is giving you a bit of a leg up there in fantasy football, it looks like, yeah?
That's right. Yeah, you definitely get to leverage your day-to-day for your fantasy football team decision-making. And, that's actually sort of how I got into this, right? Growing up in the 90s, it was fun with the fantasy football explosion. But even before that, it was the sports cards explosion where, sports cards and collecting them and memorizing the stats was sort of what gravitated me towards the number side of sports and the game. And over the years, that's really evolved into where we are today, where, you look at it 20, 30 years ago, and it would be hard to comprehend the type of data that we have now to quantify football.
Yeah, it's a cool area to be involved in. We were talking with the NHL last week, and I think it's the same for the NFL. The game is so much faster, stronger. The athletes are bigger, better. The game's evolving than it was, 30, 40 years ago. We need these stats to kind of keep up with the modern player, right? And, clearly that's playing dividends for you, 3 years champ. I think this is a challenge to the rest of your office, really. Like, you need to bring down Mike this year. He's got the championship belt. He's got the other trophy. We gotta get it going here, guys. So, again, for everybody in the audience, if you're just joining us, we're here with Mike from the NFL Next Gen Stats team, talking about how these stats are made, kind of what the progression has been in making them, and how the NFL's adopted this tech. And we see a lot of people joining us. Tell us your favorite team. Give your favorite team a shout out. Give us your Super Bowl prediction. If you want to try to get some fantasy advice from Mike, we can try to do that. Whatever y'all need, drop it in the chat. We'll try to get it answered live here. So, Mike, you talked about your personal connection to the sport a bit with the fantasy football stuff. Have you always been a big NFL guy? Like, how does one really get involved into the Next Gen Stats team in particular?
Yeah, it's a long story that I can tell quickly, and it really does start when I was a little kid. I'd watch every game with my grandpa, and he'd ask me, where'd that player go to college? And so I started memorizing where every player went to college. And then fantasy football came about, and I tried to get more involved with, hey, how do I win my fantasy football league? Well, that led me to the world of Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets. And so over the years, and I tried to get more involved, or it was sort of the gateway to to math and stats. Over the years, I stayed in football, and when I was at the University of Florida in college, I ended up working for the football team there in recruiting. This is a little over 10 years ago, and
Okay.
the exposure to some of the coaching staff there was Dan Quinn, who's now the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. He was the defensive coordinator there.
Wow.
Bryant Young was a defensive line coach. So there was a lot of connection to the NFL game. And really, I was doing a lot of projects, whether it was in Excel and things that, coaches could ask. But really, the goal was to how can we translate this to the NFL game? And with, the wave of analytics across sports, whether that be starting in Moneyball and working its way through sports, football really wasn't necessarily ahead of the game. And so over the years, we tried to incorporate more and more ways to allow analytics and data to draw insights to make valuable decisions. And so I parlayed my opportunity with the University of Florida, and I got a role with the Minnesota Vikings in their scouting department.
All right.
And it was a crash course into how the inner workings of an NFL franchise had a big impact on the draft and incorporating analytics there. And really after that, it was okay with the world and growing awareness of data science and computer science. How can I go and learn the skills of a data scientist? So around 2015, I left the Vikings for my master's at University of Chicago. Had a great learning experience there, being able to take what I learned from football and then look at it with the lens for statistics and analytics. And ever since I joined the NFL in 2017, in the early years of Next Gen Stats, and it's been a fun ride to have caught this wave of analytics in football.
Yeah, and let's dive into that a little bit because it has been interesting. Like, it's almost like the NFL is where baseball was with like Moneyball nowadays, right? Like that's kind of what the impression I got was with your time with the Vikings. So can you tell us what has changed with the NFL's approach for GMs? Someone just gave a Brock Purdy shout out. I'm sure that's going to mess up some things. But, what is the difference between the NFL's approach to tech and evaluating players and all these stats from 20 years ago to today?
Yeah, so if Moneyball, the book came out in 2001, or it was focused around the 2001 season, and that's when the baseball wave really happened. Basketball soon followed after in the late 2000s. Football has really exploded, I'd say, in the last 10 years. So if you were to ask a coach, and this is an anecdote that I'll never forget from Norv Turner during my time at the Vikings, and he says, "Mike, we've been doing this analytics for forever. And we've been looking at the percentages and trying to figure out what teams do on play to play. And I just said we can do it now faster and more efficiently. And we can leverage these new data sources to do the things that quality control coaches are doing on a day-to-day basis manually." So really, it's been fun to see this wave happen in football. Certainly, there's a ton of different areas that a football team can optimize and utilize analytics across the area and across the organization. You can first start off with simply how do you pick the best players in the draft? Take all the information that you have and make predictions on the draft. You could take the Next Gen Stats player tracking data and come up with better performance metrics for players who are in the pros already. This can help you with self-scouting. It can help you with opponent scouting. And it could also help you with free agency and pro evaluations. And then you can get into the player performance and health and the making sure that your players are maximizing their output every Sunday. So the strength and conditioning coaches have gravitated towards it over the years. And the player tracking data has really been at the key center of all of this to enable new data points to be developed really across all of the mini games within the game of football.
Yeah, like I could talk about that stuff all. I find it so fascinating, like thinking about how GMs are looking at that deeper level stuff. It's not just like, man, that guy can throw 80 yards. It's also, is he going to fit? Like, what are his other metrics? How is he going to turn out long term? If I'm roster building, like which free agents are going to be the best? Like you said, strength and conditioning. It's not just, let's lift every single day. Like there's strategy behind, what different players do. Like I love getting into all this. So I'm super excited for our conversation today. I think like as a fan, where I really started to see this like football kind of renaissance with stats come about was with next gen stats. Like we started seeing those commercials come out. We started seeing those things pop up on our TVs during games. So can you kind of tell us, how did next gen stats specifically come about, and what is the exact tech behind what that program that you guys are a part of is?
Yeah, so Next Gen Stats as a project idea has been around for over 10 years. As an execution, we first launched in 2015 in specific stadiums, and then full fledged in every stadium in 2016. So our data goes back to 2016. We have microchips, RFID chips, in every player's shoulder pads. It's
Oh, okay.
tracking their X, Y, speed, acceleration, their distance, their orientation for every tenth of a second on every play. And so what this is doing is it's creating millions of rows of data for every game. And it's allowing us to take the raw XY tracking data and combine it with traditional box score
Mhm.
stats that you'd see like touchdowns and yards.
Yeah.
And that's really the foundation for how we create our next gen metrics. So what this is you could imagine that taking the XY data of a receiver and their cornerback covering him, you could take the XY data of each player, take the difference, and you can measure how much separation the receiver created on a play. You
Yeah.
could measure how far the ball traveled in the air by taking at the time the pass was thrown to the time the pass arrived, how far did the ball travel in the air, how much time did they throw. All of these are stats that can be generated from the XY tracking data. And now over the years, we've grown our stats toolbox, and we've gotten into even more advanced statistics that are derived from AI and ML models that tell a story that really it would be impossible to crunch all of these numbers in any other way. So now
Yeah.
we've got stats like what coverage are they running, what route did a receiver run, what's the probability of getting a pressure on this play. And so each year, the stats toolbox from NGS has evolved, and not just the stats. We now have an impact across the league itself. So not only are we creating new stats, and not only are we getting these stats in broadcasts and in games, but the clubs are using it to make decisions, as we mentioned. The league is using it to make decisions, whether it's officiating or player health and safety. And really, we're using it for a lot of operational instances, whether it's clipping games, clipping video, identifying who's on the field for participation. All of these different elements are ways that NextGen Stats is providing value, not just to create new stats, but to create new products across the football ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool that I didn't expect when we first started, planning this show was the fact that it's actually chip enabled. So I would have thought, like at first glance, shoulder pads might not be the greatest place to put computer equipment. So I thought that was pretty cool that way it's actually chips in the players and the pads. We actually got kind of a funny question here related to like clips and stuff. Do you know if that, or is that tech how y'all did like the Toy Story game and all that, like with the do you know anything about how they did that?
Yes, and yes, the answer is absolutely. So the Toy Story game was a fusion of RFID sensor-based tracking, which is the current next-gen system, and an optical tracking system that uses computer vision to identify limbs. So you're talking about 25 data points that not just point estimate between
Yeah.
their shoulder pads, but getting the full limb estimation and pose estimation for all of the players. So when you saw Trevor Lawrence make that juke move on that scramble run, that was directly from the data. So they were able to animate those Toy Story animations using the tracking data. And the key there was the fusing of the two data sources, one from computer vision and one from the single point estimate RFID chips.
That's pretty cool. So it's not only just the stats, it's leading to some pretty cool things, different broadcasting capabilities as well. And I want to bring it back to, so, y'all have had Next Gen Stats as a project for a number of years now. And I think AWS came in 2017, if I remember correctly, right? So when did AWS come in? Like, what was why did we come in? What was the partnership there? Why
Yeah.
did y'all partner with AWS?
So Over the years, our AWS relationship and partnership has grown to a lot of different prongs, you could say. At
Hmm.
first, we were looking to create new metrics, and how do we do that? And so AWS provided data scientists, and we started creating new machine learning metrics. This included completion probability, expected rushing yards, coverage classification, route recognition. So each of these models are stats that we created with the tracking data. But in addition to AWS working and developing stats over the years, they're also all of our infrastructure. So whether our servers, our databases, our cloud environment, all of these operations are now being aggregated using AWS software. And what this does is it enables us to have more of a centralized focus and relationship with AWS. So I know our research analyst team on a day-to-day basis is using QuickSight to find a lot of our advanced metrics and
Yeah.
to munge these dashboards to find the best stats and stories. And so even though it might appear that we're coming up with new stats ideas each year, there's a lot of different avenues that we're using and running with AWS that has to do with databases, servers, Gen AI is we're dipping our feet into, and a lot of other applications. And so it's more than just creating new stats with AWS.
Yeah, and if anybody sees, so for those of you just joining us, quick summary too. I'm joined with Mike Band here from the NFL's Next Gen Stats team. We're talking today about how these Next Gen Stats are created, kind of the story behind them, and we're going to talk later with some of our tech people about how actually they work from the technical standpoint, right? The full journey from those chips in the pads to what we see on our TV screens every Sunday. Mike is an expert in the next gen stat stuff. He's worked with the Vikings. He's worked with this stuff for quite a while for the NFL. He's very keyed in, so we're happy to have him. If you see me looking over here, it's because I'm looking at y'all's comments and making sure we get those answered. So if you do have questions or comments for Mike, be sure to drop them in the chat here. We had an interesting one come in. With all this data that's coming in, is it possible to look at how a game turned out and replay it for coaches maybe in like a different scenario? Like if they had run one play instead of another play, is that something that's, we're able to do yet?
It's certainly a good aim and a good goal to get to, and that would certainly involve some major simulation. I think we're not yet at that point because really the game itself is it's too error prone. There's too many manual interventions. So you could say that the outcome of any play could have X outcome, but when you play it out, it might not have that outcome. It's sort of the game of small n. And so the idea of a complex simulation, you really do have to take into account so many new variables: who's on the field at what point in the game, how are they playing in that game. And so to create all of those features that would power a lot of those things that you'd have to predict, it's a very complex thing. I think there is probably more of a short-term answer to that, which is evaluating independently certain scenarios and certain decisions. Did we make the right decision in this play? There's a lot of post hoc analysis that is happening on a week-to-week basis, especially in terms of clubs. And so what you do on fourth down, what you do to just make a decision on 2-point conversions, all of these decisions are very much they're situational based, but they also they can be analyzed to say, okay, on the whole, did we make the right decision in this play? Now, when you get to say did we call the right play? The complexities of an NFL playbook, all of the intricacies of did we do the right thing and did the defense react the right way? It's incredibly nuanced and incredibly complex to the point where we're still far away from saying, okay, they ran a flood concept or a sail concept to this side, right? What's the probability of that converting in that situation? Well, you better be able to have sail and flood concepts being tagged across your entire data set to be able to identify that probability. And so you could imagine that what we're doing is we're chipping away at all the fields that you would want to have at every player and play level. And once we get enough tags, you can start getting into the bigger simulation. But really, we're worried about the mini games as much as we are the big game.
Gotcha. And we're getting some questions too, kind of about the process now. Where does AWS come in? Like, what's the process of creating these stats? That kind of lends right in well to my next question, right? So when we were talking about how y'all come up with which metrics to look at, which stats to create, right? You mentioned something that I actually didn't know about called the Big Data Bowl, right? So that's one of the starting points for a lot of these stats. Can you kind of tell us what that is?
Yes, and it's exciting because the 2024 Big Data Bowl just opened last week.
Oh, perfect.
So for any data scientists, analysts, or fan alike out there, it is an open source competition where you get to create the next gen stat. And forgive me for my double word there, but yes, we are creating the next metrics out of our player tracking data. And really, over the years, the competition has evolved and the number of submissions has gotten greater and bigger. And this allows us to leverage all of the expertise from all of the fans at home who do have this level of expertise, whether it being in statistics, data science, or even just football acumen. And so over the years, the first competition was about route running. The second competition was coverage. And so over the years, we have mined some of the best submissions for a lot of our concepts that you now see with Next Gen Stats. For this last season, it was the 2023 Big Data Bowl, and this open source competition focused on the trenches, so offensive versus defensive line in the passing game. And the concept was, how can we create and better quantify this matchup? And really, we're relegated to sacks and you know how many plays they had. But we know that the game of a pass rush is much more nuanced than just did you create a sack on a play.
Yeah.
And so the 2023 Big Data Bowl was rich in incredible submissions, in that we took a lot of the ideas across different submissions and really tried to create and hone in on what can we do this summer to create new metrics pertaining to the pass rush versus offensive line and to pressure probability. And not just pressure probability. So pressure probability, you could imagine, rather than having a yes, no, did they generate pressure or not? We wanted to take the tracking data and say, over time, how much pressure did you create? Mm-hmm. How much impact did you create over time? And then can we measure and can we create metrics out of that estimate? And so not only are we doing estimating pressure probability, we're also saying who blocked and who rushed the passer on a given play. We're also saying who blocked who on a given play. So once you take all of these three components, you can now create a series of stats for the offensive lineman, because now you know who blocked who on a given play, and you can attribute the pressure to that offensive lineman. And so each of these ideas was a different machine learning model that's in production. It runs in real time and can be done using the raw tracking data to generate these predictions. And so out of this model that started, that was inspired from submissions in March, we got together with AWS's Machine Learning Solutions Lab team, now known as the Gen AI group. And really this has been a last, 8+ months have been a complete dive into how we would take an idea to production. So first, we got together and had a kickoff meeting and set our objectives. We're looking for, can we do 3 different models? Identify pressure over time, who's blocked and who rushed, and who blocked who. And over those months, we really divided up the project and created each of those independent models. AWS would propose, hey, try this modeling structure. Let's try a neural network here. Or, hey, let's actually, probably more simplified tree-based approach might work here as well. And so leveraging the ML expertise from the AWS side enabled us to do what we do best and to think in terms of football. And so August came around and preseasons is in full swing. And that's when we were able to deliver our models, or we got the models from AWS. And it takes about a month to put them all into production to make sure that all of our processors are going to trigger this model after every single play. And really what that led to was from March to September, we took idea to a stat. And now you'll see pressure probability across NFL broadcasts, across NFL media products. And the goal here being that we can now tell an incredibly new, rich set of stories pertaining to the trenches.
That's awesome. And, you gave us a lot of information there. So I want to take a quick second to summarize it. So first and foremost, that Big Data Bowl, right? That's super cool. And I think anybody watching right now, like in the audience, like it's a cool way to get involved. Like you guys can have an effect on what Mike and his team end up creating with these next gen stats. So I think we dropped a link in the show here about if you want to learn more about the Big Data Bowl, go ahead and go to this page in the chat. And you can give suggestions about, what you think good stats would be. And, you might end up being the next pressure probability, right? So that's really cool that you guys get that interaction with the fans. And then also you mentioned the latest stat is pressure probability. I think we have a video queued up to kind of explain what it is and show folks what it's going to be all about. And then when we come back, we have a good question here from, it looks like K3VX about how teams use that. So I want to circle back to that. But let's go ahead and play the video now explaining pressure probability.
Pressure probability, a new machine learning powered metric that takes pass rushing stats beyond the box score by measuring pressure for every pass rusher every second of every pass play. Building off submissions from the Big Data Bowl, this new stat required 4 new AI models to be developed based on over 90,000 passing plays over the last 5 years. Using sensor data from the entire play, the team first had to identify defensive rushers, offensive blockers, and how they match up against each other. Leveraging this data, AWS built an AI model that's able to identify pressure beyond just distance-based logic. We can now see how quickly a pressure occurs, the magnitude of the pressure, and how it changes over the course of the passing play. It also factors in key details, like how clear a path the rusher has to the quarterback, and how the quarterback reacts to an oncoming rusher. As machine learning continues to transform sports analytics, AWS machine learning is opening up new insights and stories about pressure in the NFL. For more info, visit aws.com/NFL.
I love that video. I think it explains it pretty succinctly. It's such a cool stat. I'm definitely more of a defensive guy. I mean, for those of you that watch the show, you might know that I am unfortunately a Broncos fan, but back in the heyday of Von Miller and that 2015 defense, I loved seeing all the sacks, loved getting involved with that. And I think it's a really cool stat to see. But I want to get into how they're actually being used, right? And we have a user here with a pretty good question about, are these stats shared with NFL teams, and do teams use this as analysis for their game strategy beyond even just simple things like, should we go for it on 4th downs? I think that's the first thing that pops into all of our heads. Do they use it for we should have DeMarcus Ware out there instead of Von Miller for this play? Or what's the extent that teams in the league use these stats?
Yeah, they're using them. Every team's a little different, but teams are definitely using these metrics. And there's 2 or 3 main reasons where they're leveraging this data. The first is to prepare for their opponent. And so if you've got tendency-based data where you know that this team runs motion or play action on a certain percentage in certain situations, those are tips, those are insights that you can communicate, one to your coaches, and if it's important enough, all the way down to your players. And so the concept of working efficiently and working smart to prepare for your game each week, they are absolutely looking at a lot of these stats to identify which players to watch out for, what are their strategic tendencies, and really that comes down to how can we better prepare for the game. Mm-hmm. But then there's the element of how do we evaluate player performance? How do we pick up a player during the week when we need a free agent? How can we evaluate free agents in the offseason to know how much to pay them for their performance or future performance? Yeah. And so a lot of this is to try to come up with more signal in the stats, you could say. So if you were to evaluate a pass rusher based off of the sacks they created, you would be neglecting a significant proportion of the pass rushes that they've had. And so you take a model like pressure probability, where you now have a series of different metrics that you can extract from this model. You can look at their average peak probability. You can look at their average probability. You can look at how often their probability is greater than their snap probability, a sort of a positive pass rush. And so a lot of these metrics are quantifiable ways to measure performance better than any box score traditional stat could. And then you look into the concept of, okay, how can we know our own players better, and what do they do well? And so the concept of self-scouting. And so if you put it all together, opponent scouting, self-scouting, and then how do we find players in terms of pro evaluations? Those are three areas where the data is being used directly. And then you take a step back and you mentioned fourth down decisions and that type of guide. That's when you get into in-game strategy. And most teams now have a representative from the analytics department on headset in the coach's booth communicating with the head coach.
So it's not even just like a cheat sheet. They actually have someone talking to them like, we should or should not do this.
That's right. And what they're doing is they're limited to very low level tech in the coach's booth. So they're doing a lot of their charts and run books in order to set up and prepare for those situations. Yeah. But yes, whether it comes down to timeouts, fourth downs, going for two, challenging the play, all of these are now being relegated towards someone in the booth from the analytics department who's trying to optimize the game management and in-game strategy decisions.
Gotcha. So next time the Broncos miss a timeout, I should yell at the analytics guy and not Sean Payton. I think that's my main takeaway. But it's really cool that it's that well integrated. I think a lot of people, myself included, as fans, we watch it, we see the commercials, we think it's cool, but we didn't know how much teams actually used it, and the fact that like I guess chief analytics guy actually existed as a part of the main coaching staff now. So that's super cool. For those of you just joining us too, looks like we got some new viewers coming in. We're joined today by Mike Band from the NFL Next Gen Stats team. He is a pro with the strategy and also the mechanics behind all these Next Gen Stats we see on TV every Sunday. He's a fantasy football champion. He's worked with the Vikings for a while, and now he's in the Central NFL office. So he's got some really cool stories and background information to tell us. If you're just joining us now, you can rewatch this episode on whichever platform you're watching, or go to our YouTube page, which we can drop in the comments here in a second. Mike, I know our time here is kind of coming to an end for your specific segment. Before we bring in some of the tech guys to explain, how exactly we take that data from the chips and the shoulder pads and actually get it to people's TVs and get it to the coaches' boxes. But I'm always curious, you're very, in the weeds with all this data stuff with Next Gen Stats. Is there anything that you're looking forward to or most excited about in the future?
Our technology is evolving rapidly, or the technology around tracking data in sports is evolving rapidly. And what we're extremely excited about is the potential of optical tracking and computer vision. And so when you merge together a hardware solution and computer vision, that's when we think that we're going to get a whole new rich set of data to work with. You saw the POC with Toy Story, the animation game, and you could imagine that that's just the beginning of ways for the fans to watch the game and to take in the experience. So when we get this new rich data set, it will have significantly more stats to be able to create over the years. And, it'll certainly be a lot more computationally heavy, but you can imagine that we can start getting into release time for quarterbacks, or, vision for running backs, and a lot of different stats that wouldn't be possible from the 2D XY that we're currently getting, that can now just be compounded to this new rich data source. So what you'll see over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be truly exciting and groundbreaking. It's taking what we love most, and that is sports and football and technology and the evolution of it. So it's exciting to see where this is all headed.
Absolutely. And we actually had a quick question that's a good follow-up here to end your segment here. When the NFL comes to places like the UK or Germany, is one of the stipulations then that how do we get the data from those other stadiums? Do we have like trucks or something that come in, or are all those stadiums equipped with the same tech to be able to gather that data from the chips? How does that work?
It's a great question. And the answer is, so Zebra is our hardware producers for our current chip providers, and their system is installed in all of our international venues. So when we do create or do play a new international game, we do have to work to equip that stadium with those sensors. And so that does create a challenge every time we do go to a new city, but it is something that our goal of ours is to have that complete digital record of every player of every game.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I know you're a busy guy, so I appreciate you taking 30 minutes out of your schedule to be with us today. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be joined in a second here by some tech experts to walk through all this stuff that Mike's been talking about, give us that journey of the data from the pads to the TV. But Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great having you. Hopefully you can come back on for a future episode and give us some more insight into some more of these new next-gen stats we're creating. So thank you so much.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, everyone. So, I mean, that was an awesome segment. I'm definitely a football guy. I nerd out on all these metrics, and being able to talk to Mike for the last few weeks setting up this show has been a real pleasure. So next up, we've got some tech experts from AWS, Henry Wang and Dan Volk, that are going to be coming in. They're the guys more on the execution side of what Mike has been talking about with pressure probability. They're going to give us the full story of how pressure probability happens, how it's made, the background, the troubleshooting they did, and what all goes into executing this stat and getting it onto your screen. But before we get to that, please remember to take our survey while we have a quick second here before everybody comes in. It's a 2-minute survey max. The first 50 respondents will get $10 in AWS credits to try out some of these technologies we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes. And it's a great way. We do read them, good and bad. I try to, focus on the good, but good and bad comments about if you like the show. And most importantly, it lets you tell us what kind of content you want to see in the future, what leagues you want us to talk to. This is the NFL episode. We've already done some with the NHL, NASCAR, and Bundesliga. So let us know who you want to see next, and we'll try to get it on the schedule here. We do value your feedback, though. And like I said, if you're one of the first 50 to submit it, you get $10 to be able to play around with some of this tech we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, I want to bring in Henry and Dan from the AWS team to explain some of this technology. So let's see if we can get them to join here. All right, seamless. What's going on, guys? How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you, Nick?
Good, thanks. So before we get rolling here, can you guys give a quick introduction into who you are and what the heck a data scientist and applied scientist is for Gen AI at AWS?
Sure. I'll kick it off. Henry and I are part of the same team. My name is Dan Volk. I've been with AWS for about 4 years and originally joined as part of the Machine Learning Solutions Lab. So we are kind of the front end of AWS's AI initiative. So we're getting out with strategic customers, trying to help them accelerate their AI ML journey. More recently, we've actually shifted our focus onto generative AI because there's so much excitement in this sector about just all these emerging technologies.
That's all anybody talks about is Gen AI these days, right?
Exactly. And I'm a co-lead of the sports vertical as well. So I work with a lot of our sports customers, and my co-lead is Henry.
Yeah, Henry, can you give us an introduction? And I'm kind of disappointed you clearly didn't get our memo about the blue shirts today, but we'll try to just look past that and still interview you, I guess. But can you tell us a little bit about what you do on this team?
Yeah, thanks for being gracious, Nick, and pay better attention to the memos next time. I'm invited. But yeah, I co-lead the sports vertical with Dan, and we actually joined the team roughly about the same time. So it's been 4 years for me as well at the team. So we basically work with a lot of customers on building these machine learning solutions, and being that us leading the sports vertical, we had the blessing and the opportunity to actually work with a lot of sports customers. NFL is one of the ones that we have most recently been worked with, and I think we're going to talk more about that in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into that. Before we do, are you guys football fans yourself? Who's your favorite team?
Yeah, so I'm a Seahawks fan. So sorry about the Super Bowl. Sorry about the Russell Wilson contract.
But you guys have really been.
Thank you for.
I was going to say my brother-in-law is a big Seahawks fan. That's led to a lot of pain over the years. Some really bad bets on my part. The 2013 Super Bowl. Long story short, after that game, I had to wear a bedazzled Seahawks top down ski slopes in Colorado the week after that game. So not a huge fan of the Seahawks. That kind of scarred me a bit. But, Oh well.
Your brother-in-law sounds like a great guy. Sounds like he's
Yeah.
got a good head on his shoulder.
Yeah, yeah. Well, debatable, but did you're a Seahawks fan? What else has been your tie to the NFL and kind of applying this Gen AI stuff to the NFL use case?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always just been interested in sports from a stats perspective. I have a background in stats, and because I'm not good at sports, this is another way that I can participate.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, I mean, I always dive into the stats. I always like to look at some of the latest stuff, and really, it's just a huge privilege to be able to work with the Next Gen Stats team and all the cool work they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Henry, what's your tie to football? I know you said you're more of a recent fan of the game, right?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, just want to correct Dan. He's actually a very sporty person. I've seen him actually play, so he's definitely being modest there.
All right.
But yeah, football. I experienced the first time when I came to US to study. That was back in 2012, and it was like did not make much sense to me. But as I started living into multiple different places, seeing the passion these different places, the fans, all there, the thrills the game brings in, right? It's
Yeah.
making me realize, okay, there's actually a lot more to the game. And as I'm learning more about the game by working with NFL, and actually one of the very um, interesting episodes that really got me to the quarterbacks, where they actually revealed how just these players, not just players, right? They're actually human beings at they're being like dads, husbands, and the sons, and that really made me realize, okay, understanding or getting to know these players at the personal level
Yeah.
made me really tied to how they are performing and the kind of pressure they're under when
Yeah.
executing during those games. So it's really paramount they are able to pull these off. And at the moment, I guess I have to root for Patrick Mahomes and being a fan
Oh
of
gosh.
Kansas City Chiefs.
You guys are just teaming up on me today. What is this? Like the Broncos don't have enough to be sad about. But no, I think it's cool, Henry, from your perspective too, like kind of learning the game by coming up with these stats and getting to that deeper knowledge is a way that's like kind of unique and I think a cool way to learn the game, being able to be behind the scenes for a lot of these innovations that we're seeing in the game. So for everybody just joining us, Dan and Henry are about to take us through kind of the data journey from taking the data from the sensors that we saw in the shoulder pads of NFL players that Mike told us about and generating these stats like pressure probability. So if you're just joining us, please remember, drop questions you have for them in the chat as we go here. We'll also drop links to all the tech that they mention so that you can try to experiment with it if you want and kind of see, get your hands wet with, or get your hands dirty with all the different things we're talking about. So we'll try to get those questions answered live on the show. If not, we've got some people in the chat that should be able to get some answers for you. So we love seeing questions. Please drop them in as we go here. So, oh, perfect. We got a help request for the Giants. So at least it's not just the Broncos fans. They're a little sad right now. So let's get into it, guys. First and foremost, we saw from Mike, what the AWS NFL working relationship was like from more of the NFL's perspective. Can you enlighten us some more on, the NFL comes to us with what they want for stats and then we just build it, or like how do we really integrate? Where do we fit into that working process with the NFL?
Yeah, so I'll maybe give a little bit more history about how this partnership formed, and then we'll pass it over to Dan to talk about how you actually work with NFL. So our partnership really, as Mike said, started quite a while ago. And then back in 2017, reInvent, the NFL was announcing the Next Gen Stats partnership with AWS. Okay,
and
how can
real quick, reInvent, for those that don't know, because that's a great little plug. We have it every year in Vegas for a week, the week after Thanksgiving. Super fun time. Lots of cool innovations are launched there. So that's what reInvent is. You should tune in if you can. Like I said, it's the week after Thanksgiving this year. We can maybe drop a link to the reInvent registration website. But I'm sorry, Henry, just wanted to do that little plug there for
that was awesome. Yeah, thanks for the background, Nick. Yeah, so during this big event, this annual event for AWS, the partnership on how NFL is partnering with the AWS on introducing or including more machine learning AI components into building and enhancing these stats really came to surface, right? And then throughout the years, we have been collaborating and working pushing and innovating the NFL and AWS. And in 2019, again, there's a more partnership being announced on the player health and safety, right? How can we leverage more machine learning and AI to keep the player safe as well? So I think throughout the journey that we have known that NFL is always there to solve really tough questions, and they're looking for the partner to help them enable those situations. And we are very lucky to be selected and to infuse the innovative spirit we'll have within AWS. Yeah.
So it debuted reInvent 2017. Like and again, like what was what's the working relationship there? Like what part does each of us play? And then also what were the first things we did from that, starting at that partnership in 2017?
Sure, I can take that one. So, so we've done a number of stats since then. We've done the completion probability. The new one, obviously, is pressure probability, fourth down decision, expected rushing yards, coverage classification, route detection, and all those ones that Mike mentioned. We'll go a little deeper on pressure probability. Okay. But yeah, every year, so as Mike mentioned, we got they have the big data bowl, and that's really where they get the fan inspiration, and those are really like good jumping off points for use cases. So the NFL takes those submissions from that big data bowl, and you should participate if you have the opportunity. But they take those and they really try and build a set of insights that they can start building a story around.
Okay.
And that's where we get involved. So they come in with a couple of kind of key things they want to zero in on. And we work together to not just say, okay, you want, at a high level, this is the use case. We also try and bring that back to the data, bring that back to the metrics and the modeling and how we're going to evaluate, whether we've accomplished our goals.
Okay.
And then once we all agree on and level set as to what the expectations are, we get into the cadence of working together. This was for the pressure probability, we did this really fast. It was like 4 to 5 weeks. It was super rushed.
Okay.
But it's an iterative
just
process.
The season was coming up. Like, why was it?
Yeah, we got, I think, a late start. So
okay.
we kicked this off in like July, and we got it finished by early August. But gotcha. It's an iterative process. So we come up with a set of solutions, hand it over to them. They say, hey, looking at this, we think we need to improve here or here. They look at corner cases and stuff. They hand it back to us. And we iterate like that for a number of weeks. And then once everybody's satisfied with where we've landed, we hand over the code to them and they go deploy in their environment. So it's a really fun process, and they're a really great team to work with.
Yeah, and I think the coolest part of that process too, just as a fan, is the fact that there is this thing called the Big Data Bowl. And for those of you that didn't get to see Mike talk about that from the NFL, basically the Big Data Bowl is a way that you as fans can come to the NFL and suggest some next-gen stats for them to create. So you can kind of be a part of this process, which I think is super cool and kind of unique to the NFL from what I know so far. So you get the suggestions from the Big Data Bowl. The NFL kind of narrows it down, brings it to AWS and says, hey, this is what we want to do. And then from there, it's kind of like an iterative partnership of we pitch like we think this will work. The NFL says, maybe tweak that a little bit. So they're the football experts, we're the tech experts, and we just kind of go back and forth until we arrive at a solution that everybody likes. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. And yeah, well, we just dropped the link again to that Big Data Bowl. If any of you guys watching want to lean into that and learn about it, see if you can come up with some cool suggestions. I know they just started the 2024 round last week. So I highly recommend everybody go there and see if you can get involved with this year's Big Data Bowl. So let's get into that pressure probability, though. That's the thing that we've been selling for the last hour. That's what we want to get into, right? So starting from like the highest level, right? What's the high level use case of this pressure probability? It came from this Big Data Bowl. The NFL came to us and said, this is what we want to do. How does that kick off the process? What was the use case we were looking at, and how does all that get rolling?
Yeah, so kind of as Mike mentioned, we don't, and this is true not just across the NFL, but across a variety of different sports that we've heard from our sports customers, is that uh, we don't have a really good way of tracking a lot of defensive statistics.
Okay.
Um, because a good defender, if they're doing their job, won't really the ball won't be around them, the action won't be around them because they're doing such a good job.
Yeah.
Um, and for the pass rush specifically, we really only had, you know, a 1-0 of did they get a sack or did they not get a sack, and that's really not showing you the granularity of all the things that can happen during a pass rush. A player can get close to the quarterback and force them out of the pocket, maybe force them to make a throw too quickly. All that stuff has an impact on the play. And so we wanted to be able to work with the NFL to really quantify that. And then the added ability of this was to be able to take matchups and say, okay, now this pass rusher is going against this specific blocker. So how can we analyze how, you know, this pass rusher does when they're going up against a offensive tackle versus a guard? How do they handle double teams? Those types of things, so that we can get more granular with how players perform in different scenarios. So there's a lot that we've been able to get out of this, and the NFL is really taking this stat and run with it.
Gotcha. And let's get into the background then of how it works. So now that we understand kind of where it came from, we got some agreement from the chat here about how important defense is. I agree. Defense, I think, is kind of more fun than offense to watch, but maybe I'm biased. But, you know, let's get into how it works. So we're talking about pressure probability. What goes into it? What is the journey of this data? So for those of you just joining us too, we learned that the data for NFL players isn't from cameras or, you know, sensors on the field. It's actually from sensors that players have in their equipment and their shoulder pads. So once we collect that data, what's its journey from the players' pads to our TVs as viewers?
Yeah, so I think those are sensors installed in the equipment, and those are constantly sending signals, these telemetry signals, actually multiple times per second, and
Okay.
being sent over, which measures, say, the speed, the XY locations of the players, and their acceleration, orientation, etc. Right? So it's an ocean of information that is actually being captured in the data. So all those data are collected, and they are batched together and being shared with our team. And we actually had access to over 90,000 plays over the last 5 years. That
Dang.
was for us to analyze and really extract the insights and patterns
So
from
that was
this
just like the
data.
lake that we built it from. That was just like the background data that's not even like active every Sunday. That's just
Correct.
okay.
As we take all these raw data, right, there's a bunch of machine learning things we need to do with it, right, such as how do we transform the data, how do we construct the features that are helpful
Okay.
for building these models. So as Mike has mentioned, right, like this use cases actually has composed of multiple machine learning models. So the very first one, or the first couple ones, is the identifying the blocker and rushers, and
Okay.
identify what their matchups are, right? So all of these historical data, say if we look at the play level, we actually not only have the tracking data, but we also have these human annotated labels about, okay, who are the rushers, who were the blockers during those plays, and how did they match up with each other, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of label for us to leverage. And as we build out these supervised machine learning ways, we leverage these labels as well as the features constructed from the sensor data to
Okay.
build and automate the detection of the players as
Okay.
well as prediction of their matchups.
Gotcha. So just to make sure I'm following correctly, because again, I'm not a huge techie, so I speak on behalf of all the beginners out here. So the data is collected from these players' pads, and I assume it's sent to like a database, right? Is it S3? I assume is where all these 90,000 plays that we built this on is stored.
That's
And then
correct.
Yeah.
from there, we take machine learning models or Gen AI models, one of those two, and that is what actually starts predicting these probabilities. It looks at all those different points that you talked about, the distance between offensive, defensive line, who's on the field, where, all that fun stuff. And that's what eventually generates pressure probability. Am I following correctly so far?
Yeah, so I think after we generate all those, the sort of the premise, right, knowing who's matching up with whom, then we started building more into, okay, how do we leverage these informations to build the actual or estimate the actual pressure probability? Dan, do you
Gotcha.
want to talk about those?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
so
so
that,
go
that's
ahead, yeah.
that's the big thing, right? Is Gen AI, machine learning. That's the hot topic right now that everybody wants to get in on. So you mentioned that that's a major part of this process. We have to train those models, right, to be able to analyze this data correctly. What does that mean? I assume, you don't do like a water spritzer and tell them positive reinforcement. Like, how do we actually train these models to be able to generate this statistic?
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, a lot of things behind these machine learning, right? It needs some guidance around it. And what we were leveraging is we were using the historical, say you can sort of think of these as signals that the humans provided by watching all those plays and saying, hey, like this is actually the rusher out of all the players, and these are the blockers of all the players, right? And we take the all the information and the historical context of it, and we train the model to say, hey, try to understand how the humans are assigning these values to these plays,
Mhm.
right? And we're making the machine smarter to say, let's now try to do it on your own, right? Based on the guidance or these kind of like signals that we're providing to you. Can you mimic the behavior of a human being?
Gotcha. Okay. How long does that process generally take? You said the whole, project took about 6 weeks. That was kind of a faster timeline than normal. How long did it take to actually train these models to be able to predict this pressure probability in a way that was accurate and that the NFL agreed with?
Yep. So it really varies, and I think for us building machine learning models, right? Not just there is a time about training these models, but there's also the time of how we're evaluating these models and how do we need to iterate building the feature for these models. So
Yeah.
training these models takes hours, but
Okay.
actually the real, I think the real sauce of getting these model into the stage where everybody is satisfied is through iterative iterations by
Okay.
talking with NFL and getting their domain experts, right? They're the experts in NFL. They know, okay, what kind of features
Mhm.
are most important when you are deciding who are the players or what kind of plays are being generated with pressure, etc. So these iterative loop helped us with the
Gotcha.
model.
That's a good segue then. Let's talk about that iterative process and how do you guys evaluate once you train a model? How do we evaluate if it's accurate or not? And can you kind of give us a insight, like a peek behind the curtain into like the failure process, right? Do we learn like how we learn from those mistakes, how we keep getting better and better? Because that's something I think everybody's always interested in, right? We don't just immediately strike, hit the bullseye with these first trained models. So what's that process like?
Yeah, so the evaluation approach that you use really depends on the question you're trying to answer. So for the two projects, the rusher identification and the matchup identification, let's just take the passer or the rusher blocker identification. We really wanted to know whether or not we were correctly identifying those players as rushers or blockers. But then there's also, you can take a really naive approach and you can say like a center is pretty much 100% of the time going to be a blocker. You can
Yep.
say, oh, my model's right 100% of the time. What we really did to evaluate this model was to say, okay, that model is correct 99% of the time. What additional are we getting out of it? Are we getting an additional 99.5% or 99.8? So we were looking at that one from a lift perspective, and that really was much more important, less with the offensive lineman, but with positions like tight end and running back, where they can kind of block, they can kind of they can be blockers on plays or not, more like 50% of the time. And then for pressure probability, what really mattered was not so much that we got did they or did they not get pressure for the play, but really how well calibrated was that model. So if we say that there's a 90% chance of the player getting pressure, we want that to be correct 90% of the time. Because that means that our model isn't over or underconfident. And one of the big problems that we had with that model initially was that it was the accuracies were fine, but the calibration was bad. It was underconfident. usually when there was a sack or something like that, it would only get as high as saying about 80% probability of pressure. So what we ended up doing was we simplified the model, and our simplified approach really had a much cleaner distribution. And now the calibration is very, very good for that model. So it really depends on which model you use, but and kind of the question you're trying to answer. But we train a model, we see how it's performing, we iterate, we build new features, we get feedback from the NFL team. The NFL team is great about diving into the examples that we share with them and saying like, hey, this is where you're doing well, this is where you're doing poorly, here are the corner cases.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think it's cool to be able to hear about how AWS and like how you guys actually execute that, right? And the fact that we are trying to be that precise and that accurate with all these before we even debut them. This isn't something that we see on our screens and we're still learning on the fly. So we're going to move kind of into, I'd like to hear how that can be leveraged maybe into some other industries to wrap up our show here. But before we get to that, like we do have some comments like in the chat. You know, we would love to hear questions. If you guys have any questions for Dan and Henry about any of the stuff that they've spoken about in the last 20 minutes here about how they've made pressure probability for next-gen stats a reality, we'll try to get them answered live. If we don't get them answered live, we have some people in the chat to hopefully point you guys in the right direction. But yeah, I know Dan and Henry explained everything fantastic. But if you guys have any questions following up with them, please let us know in the chat. So before I let you guys go for the last few minutes here, I'd love to hear your opinions on, we talked about, getting this data into S3 and then using Gen AI and machine learning to generate these probabilities, right? And be able to guess with a lot of accuracy, like, is a sack going to happen on this play based on all of these different factors like distance and who's lined up where on the line. So moving outside the world of the NFL, maybe, can you tell us, how are those same technologies able to be leveraged for other use cases? Because not all of us work on the NFL, unfortunately. Like, well, what are some other businesses that this technology can be leveraged for?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we always get customers. NFL is one of our most visible customers. So we get a lot of customers who come to us and say, hey, we want to do next-gen stats, but for our industry. And one that I can think of off the top of my head is if you're operating like factory or some sort of manufacturing equipment, you might want to be monitoring the quality of your equipment, and you might even want to be optimizing like the way it's performing by measuring certain statistics. So that's something where you can take the data, you can stream it from the equipment, bring it into the cloud, and then you have this, as we mentioned, kind of like a big data lake where you can start slicing up the data and building features that are going to help you learn more about your machine and start training models to help you optimize your business's performance.
Gotcha. Henry, do you have anything to add to that too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, of course, maybe from a different perspective, right? Talking about this Gen AI trend, I think this is something that both Dan and I, we are really excited about, right? Is how do we leverage not just the traditional machine learning, but also more generative AI now to apply it across different kind of use cases in our customer profile, right? Across industries. For example, in sports, maybe we can think about how can we generate more personalized content, right? How can we potentially leveraging the machine learning about the video and the text understanding to generate more rich metadata around the videos to enable for more faster search or automated commentary generation. Just thinking about all the possibility in the future here. So this is what get me real excited.
Awesome. And that kind of is a good segue. We got a question from the audience here that I'd love for you guys to answer before we let you go. Where do you think sports data science will be in, or how do you think it will be used in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I'll give my prediction, which will be grossly wrong, I think, for a year from now, if we're looking at it as the field has been evolving so fast. But I really think, as Mike mentioned, right, computer vision is a really interesting field that everybody's looking into, and there's also the sensor technology, right? That the speed, the energy cost has been dropping, the accuracy has been improving. So how do we see different have the computer vision view understanding, you have the sensor. Together, how do you fuse these data together to generate the most comprehensive picture about sports? I think that's one direction the industry is moving to.
Gotcha. All right. And, before we let you go, one last one too, just on a personal basis. I got to know, you guys are the stats experts. You're behind the scenes. What's the Super Bowl prediction this year, if you have one? And it better not be the Chiefs.
I hope it's not the Niners. That's all I have.
Just not the Niners. Okay. Henry, do you have any predictions?
Well, you already know my answer, Nick. I
Gosh
alluded
darn
to
it.
that at the start.
I know. I can't speak it into existence again as a Broncos fan. I think I'd be disowned from Colorado. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It's been really fun talking to you. If you guys want to rewatch what Dan and Henry were speaking about, exploring how we've actually implemented next-gen stats, we specifically focused on pressure probability. But there's a lot of really cool things that can be applied to other industries as well that they talked about. There's a lot of Gen AI, machine learning stuff that we discussed today, and we got to see how that's being applied and how that's resulting in really interesting things for us as NFL fans. So you can rewatch it on whatever platform you're tuning into or check out our YouTube page. But Henry and Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show here. Before you go, though, please, if you've been entertained at all today, or if you just want to come back and roast me for being a Broncos fan in future episodes, please hit that subscribe button. We air every other Wednesday with a new professional sports league. If you've liked this show and you haven't seen any of our others, check out our Twitch page, some of our LinkedIn feeds, or our YouTube page to see our previous episodes with NASCAR, the NHL, Bundesliga. Next up, we are going to be talking about the gaming world. So we're going to be looking at video games, Riot Games, that sort of thing in 2 weeks. So please be sure to tune into that. We're going to be having some cool use cases there. If you haven't yet, please take our survey and let us know what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, and what type of sports leagues and use cases you want us to cover next. And if you're not a sports fan, or maybe if you're interested in some other similar content, check out our channel overall. I'm not the only show on it. We have a weekly show every Friday that dives into some of the latest launches that have happened in the cloud computing space. And then we've got specific shows for other use cases besides sports. We have a startup show. We have a show regarding compute instances. We have a show for cloud security. We've got a show for gaming situations. We've kind of got something for everybody. So check out our channel. We've got a lot of great content coming out every week. And besides that, thank you so much for joining us. And be sure to cheer on the NFL this weekend. Thanks, guys.